Rain found every seam in the night. It hissed against the cliffside glass like 1,000 whispered warnings as the single mom lifted her fist and knocked on the mansion door. The sound was small against the immensity of Rowan Hale's world, black ocean heaving below, an infinity pool mirroring storm clouds above, slate steps shining like a stage. She stood at the threshold in a thrift store coat, 2 sizes too big, a stroller beside her with 2 small shapes cocooned in blankets, and a paper envelope tucked against her heart, as if paper could be a life jacket. "Please," she said to the camera eye hidden in the eave. "Please, I need to speak to Mr. Hale." Inside, motion sensors woke a line of amber floor lights. The door opened by degrees, revealing marble, a corridor, the soundless perfume of money. A man in a dark suit regarded her with the expression of someone trained to escort trouble back into the night. But the twins stirred at the sudden warmth, and one little hand came free of its blanket. The hand touched the air as if feeling for music. "Name," the guard asked. "Nora Quinn," she said, fighting the tremor in her throat. "And these are Leo and Lily." She eyed the polished intercom on the wall. "Tell him I found something he lost, that finally cut a seam in the routine." The guard used the intercom. In a room above, behind glass that watched the sea, a man paused with a crystal tumbler at his lips. Rowan Hale, billionaire, builder of cities in places no one believed could hold them. A lighthouse and a storm, all sharp angles, and a silvered sadness that never left his eyes. He listened, breathed once, set the glass down untouched. He had expected vendors, petitioners, a journalist slipping a recorder into their coat. He had not expected a young woman soaked to the bone with 2 sleeping children and a voice full of earnest determination. He had not expected the 4 words that came next when the guard, carefully, stepped aside to search her bag. "Play the music box," Nora said. "What music box?" Nora reached into her coat and pulled out a small wooden object wrapped in a dish towel. She placed it on the hallway table as reverently as one might place a newborn. The guard hesitated, then nodded. She turned a brass key. The melody rose, thin and brave, surviving the long years inside gears and dust. A lullaby of 6 notes rising, then falling in a near weeping curve, resolving not into sweetness, but into something honest, hope that knew about heartbreak. The sound threaded itself up the stairwell and found the man at the top landing like a hand finding a pulse. Rowan descended as if pulled. He stopped 3 steps from the table, his gaze fixed not on the woman or the twins, but on the tiny, stubborn instrument. That melody belonged to a room he'd locked years ago. He had carved those notes at 21. When the world still felt like an instrument he could tune if only he believed hard enough. He had written the lullaby for his younger brother, Caleb, and for the idea of a future house filled with laughter and scraped knees and unconditional, unruly love. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was low, difficult. Nora swallowed. "From a locket around this little girl's neck when I first met them. The initials inside matched the ones carved on the back." She turned the music box to show the tiny engraving, H, the serifed letters worn soft by years of fingers. "I don't want your money. I want answers." Thunder rolled like an orchestra tuning. The twins stirred again. Leo blinked awake, staring with the solemn outrage of a child woken too soon. Lily's lashes fluttered. Her lips moved as if finishing a dream. Then, without warning, she hummed soft, unsteady, exactly in the shape of the lullaby. The music box refused to give in full. Rowan felt the sound enter him like news from the farthest part of the heart. He had walked away from music. He had built his life into girders and contracts because melodies were tender and tenderness was dangerous. He had promised himself daily that nothing would catch him unguarded again. And yet the little girl's humming threaded through that armor as if it knew the map. "Let them in," he said to the guard. The door closed on the rain. Warmth gathered them. The twins breathed air scented with cedar and linen and the faint afterglow of a fire. Nora pushed the stroller forward. Tracking small puddles on the polished floor, Rowan realized, in that suspended second, that nothing after this would be ordinary. His entire life had been orchestrated down to the minute. This was a note that did not appear on any page he had written. He had never expected that someone's knock would unlock his own past. Nora met his eyes. Hers were tired but steady. "You don't know me," she said, "but someone loved you enough to send me here." Lightning threw a bright skeleton of the world across the glass. In its brief revelation, the billionaire and the single mom appeared like a scene from a story neither would have believed of themselves, opulence staring down a stubborn hope. Both of them braced against the same storm. He led them into a living room that forgot the meaning of the word living. Architectural magazines called it a masterpiece open plan. Sight lines like vanishing points. A fireplace set into the stone like an exclamation mark. The sea flung itself against the cliff below, all roar and white fists, and the glass braced as if holding back a myth. On one wall, a grand piano slept under a cover, not a speck of dust brave enough to settle there. On another, a gallery of black and white photographs, cityscapes he had raised, skylines wearing his signature as if buildings could have autographs. Rowan Hale wore his power like the suit he had on severe, tailored to deny softness. People called him cold because no one could imagine the geography of his grief. The money made him appear tall. The loneliness made him thin. He had been born into glare and scarcity. The son of a piano teacher and a dreamer who never met a blueprint that could hold him. When his father left, the house had turned quiet except for his mother's steady hands teaching him scales and the bright, laughing echo of Caleb racing down the hall. Rowan learned to build because sound had betrayed him, because what if a note stopped and never returned? Across from him sat Nora Quinn, every inch the opposite of his world. Her coat was thrifted, seams letting go in a few places from too many careful washes. The twin stroller had a second-hand sticker curling at the corner, but her posture was proud, and her voice, when she spoke, carried a warmth that made things inside the room remember themselves. "I'm a waitress," she said. "Third shift at Harbor Diner. I also clean rooms at the Blue Lantern when it's tourist season." The twins. They came into my life a year ago this week. She looked down at them the way only someone who had learned love through effort looks like the world had a center, and it was right there, breathing sleep. "Your children?" Rowan asked. "Not by blood." She brushed a crumb from Leo's lip with her thumb. "I was dropping off donated meals at a church shelter when the bus lines were down. A volunteer pressed a basket into my arms and said, 'It's just for now, until we can figure out the paperwork.' Just for now turned into today." She opened the envelope she had clutched like a lifeline. Inside were copies of forms, a faded photograph, and a receipt for a music box repair from a shop in a neighborhood that no longer existed. Swallowed by glass and ambition, "Why me?" Rowan asked. The question was supposed to sound skeptical. It came out smaller than he intended. Nora laid the photograph on the table between them. Two young men, heads thrown back in summer laughter. The taller one, unmistakably Rowan, hair longer, eyes unguarded. The shorter had the same smile, the same stubborn dimple on the left. Caleb, alive in paper and light. On the back, in ink that had bled into the fibers. 4R. When the summer finds us. My mother's name was Elena Voss. Rowan said before he could stop himself. The room tilted. He hadn't said her name aloud in years. They had been young and poor and certain that love could pay rent. Then life performed its arithmetic without mercy, and Elena and Rowan had parted like two ships forced by different winds. Later, Elena had married Caleb, and Rowan had tried to turn that fact into a neat story he could slide into a drawer. She wore a locket, he added softly. Inside, a piece of a lullaby I wrote. Nora nodded. Lily had that locket the day I met them. The chain was broken. I had the locket repaired. She unfolded a hospital bracelet, the kind given to newborns, brittle now with years. Their birth records are a mess, but there are traceables, a clinic in a different state, a midwife who retired, a line on a form for next of kin that names a guardian with your last name and no phone number. Rowan's face didn't move, but a muscle in his jaw fluttered like a trapped bird. You could have sold the locket, he said, because it was easier than saying the other thing inside him, which was thank you, which was, where have you been carrying this hope, and how has it not broken you? Some things you carry because they feel like the only true things you're ever going to hold. She smiled, small and apologetic. I don't know if you're their family, but I know they hum that song in their sleep, and they calm down when I play it. And every time I try to imagine their future, it takes me, stubbornly, to your door. The twins woke slowly. As winter light comes into a room, Leo sat up and found Rowan with that uncanny directness of children who haven't learned to hide their curiosity. Lily yawned and announced, to no one in particular, the rain is clapping. Then she saw the piano under the cover and whispered, as if to a secret friend, there's a big hush. Rowan's mansion had been built to resist weather and gossip and time. He discovered, with something like surprise, that it had not been built to resist a small girl calling a piano a hush. He glanced at the instrument, the way an exile looks at the shore of a country they swore never to return to. He saw his mother's hands in the shine of the keys. He heard, under the measured rhythm of the storm, the first bars of his own young heart. Would you like to see the ocean? He asked the twins, and their eyes lit as if someone had flipped a switch labeled wonder. He lifted the remote that controlled the blinds. The storm was no less violent, but the glass turned it into spectacle rather than threat. All that dangerous beauty made into a window. He imagined, briefly, a world in which he had learned to do that with his own life. In that moment, the distances between them were visible and not insurmountable. Power and paycheck, linen and laundry coin, a man who had everything except what mattered, and a woman with almost nothing who had somehow built a home in the hollow of her hands. The contrast was not cruel. It was instructive. It asked a question neither yet knew how to answer. What does wealth mean if it cannot recognize its own poverty? The house adjusted to their presence like a closed fist slowly opening. But if the living room made space for their small shoes and rain-wet coats to drip in a corner, the rest of Rowan's life was less accommodating. His head of security, Mallory, stood with a tablet slick with alerts. Sir, there are protocols, she said, quiet but granite. You can't just let strangers with children in at midnight during a storm. Then write new protocols, Rowan said, more sharply than he intended. He turned to Nora. You must be freezing. There are towels in the powder room down the hall. I'll have someone bring cocoa. I don't need cocoa, Nora said. Then, because pride has its limits when you've walked through rain holding the last good thing you own, added, but the twins would love it. Mallory led them down the hall. Rowan stayed behind with the music box. He turned the key and listened to the fragile tenacity of its song. The melody sounded like a map he had drawn and then forgotten how to read. He felt something near fury for the years no one had told him, for the ways grief had made him unrecognizable to himself. By the time he joined them again, the twins' cheeks were a cartoon pink from rubbing with towels, and their small hands wrapped around oversized mugs. The cocoa left mustaches that made them look like very serious, very short scholars considering chocolate. It should have been ordinary. It felt like witnessing the invention of warmth. Then the conflict moved from the intimate to the administrative, as it always does when lives press up against money. Rowan's lawyer arrived because men like Rowan never made decisions without someone appearing with a briefcase, as if law could absorb human surprise and file it neatly. Mr. Peck was meticulous and a little cruel, in the way of those who make a living defending castles from villagers. "You appear out of nowhere," he said to Nora. He didn't sit. "You bring two unverified minors and a story that touches sentimental chords. Mr. Hale is kind, but he is also a target. We'll put you up in a hotel for the night. Secure, respectable. After that, we'll investigate." Nora's fingers tightened on her mug. "I didn't come for a room key," she said, more politely than he deserved. "I came for the truth." "The truth is complicated," Peck said. "The way a surgeon says this will hurt. If you attempt to leverage public sympathy. If you go to the press, my job is to protect Mr. Hale from reputational harm. I came alone in a storm," Nora said. "How loud do you think I want to be?" The twins squirmed, sensing the weather change. Leo developed a cough that Nora recognized, a dry, stubborn bark that had lately come to visit at night. She reached for his inhaler. Before she could find it, he wheezed in a way that made the room tilt for her. Panic does not ask permission. It arrives and rearranges your insides. "It's okay, baby," she murmured, but her voice shook. Slow breaths, slow like the song. Rowan moved without thinking. "Call Dr. Singh," he told Mallory. Now, he knelt beside Leo, who stared at him with the wild, bright eyes of a frightened animal. "Do you know the ocean?" Rowan asked softly. "How it breathes in and out. Watch." He breathed with Leo, slow and deliberate, filling the space with a steadiness that felt like a promise. In as the wave comes, out as it returns to the deep. The episode passed, leaving the boy damp with sweat and wrapped in a blanket like a brave burrito. Dr. Singh arrived like an apology with a stethoscope. "Reactive airway," she said. "Not uncommon after a cold. He'll need a nebulizer for a few days." She handed Nora a prescription and, without asking permission, set about filling Rowan's sleek kitchen with the homely hiss of steam and medicine. While the machine worked its hush, Peck returned to his thesis. "My client can offer financial assistance," he said, "a settlement to ensure the children are cared for, and you have no need to contact Mr. Ill again." Nora flinched as if struck not because of the money, but because of the attempt to turn the messy human courage it had taken to come here into something transactional. "You think I'm here to negotiate?" she asked, standing now because sitting made her feel like she had agreed to the shape of this conversation. "Sir, I clean hotel floors. I know what it means to be invisible. I know what it is to be told you don't belong in a place because your shoes tell the wrong story. But these two," her voice softened, "they've taught me a different story about belonging. A woman, Elena, gave me a letter when she was too tired to walk her words to a mailbox. I promised to deliver it. A letter, Rowan said, something bright and dangerous igniting in him. You have a letter. Nora nodded, hand going to her coat pocket. I told myself I would give it when you looked at them the way you just did. She produced a nested envelope, corners softened by handling. The outer bore a smudged postmark. The inner was creamy, expensive. The ink, a hand he recognized even before he broke the seal with careful fingers. Rowan read, standing. As his eyes moved, his face became a battlefield of tiny losses and gains. When he finished, he did something Nora did not expect. He sat, not like a man undone, but like a man finally able to set down a weight he had forgotten he was carrying. It's from Elena, he said, dated 3 years ago. She was ill. He swallowed. She writes that that they had twins, that she was afraid to tell me because she thought I had given up on family, that I was too far inside the machine of my life to understand. He laughed once, softly, nothing like humor. She thought I would send money, and that would be all. She named me guardian if they didn't make it. Peck recovered first. We'll need verification, he said, tone changing imperceptibly now that the paperwork had decided to exist. Birth certificates, DNA, clinic records. Do it, Rowan said, without looking at him. To Nora, I'm sorry for the way my world talks sometimes. It didn't always sound like this, I promise. From the hallway, a gust of colder air found them, a draft as the storm repositioned itself. Somewhere deep, the house creaked in the ancient language of timber and stone. Nora thought of the blue lantern's thin walls, of the way she'd taped cardboard over a broken pane. She thought of this room with its fortress glass, and how even here, with its curated invincibility, the wind could make something tremble. Tension hovered like a held breath. Tomorrow, Peck said crisply. We begin? He left a card on the table, a rectangle of legal authority, and excused himself as if leaving a performance before the encore. Nora stayed because she had nowhere else to go and because the twins had fallen asleep again with their heads leaning together like conspirators. Rowan stayed because he could not imagine moving away from the fragile sound of their breathing. A misunderstanding had been declared by the world that Nora had come for money, that Rowan would handle feelings like line items. The truth unspooled quieter and more insistently. Suspense built, not because any of them loved drama, but because the future had cracked open and no one knew what would step through. The morning came gray and tentative, like someone uncertain they were welcome. The storm had spent most of its fury, leaving the sea restless but less murderous. Coffee found its way into hands. The twins discovered toast with honey and declared it superior to every food that had ever existed. Somewhere between the first and second slices. The doorbell rang not like a friend, but like an appointment. Mallory ushered in a woman with a leather satchel and steady eyes. Ms. Dev Patel, she introduced, private investigator. I thought we had a lawyer. Nora murmured to Rowan. We do, he said, and we also have someone whose job is to find truths that slip between legal lines. He offered Dev a seat. What can you tell us? Dev placed a thin folder on the table and opened it with a care that suggested nothing inside was just paper. You asked me. She nodded at Rowan months ago, to see if Elena tried to contact you at the end. Your inbox was guarded by 3 assistants and a filtration system designed to repel sentiment as spam. She wrote to an old email you no longer used. Someone forwarded it to your general counsel. He replied on your behalf. Rowan's mouth tightened. What did he say? That you were sorry about her diagnosis. Dev said that you wished her well. that you were unable to be involved, that legal matters should be directed elsewhere. She slid a printed email across the table. It was signed with your name. Peck's absence became a presence. Nora thought of how easily people speak for those whose lives look like fortresses. She also thought of the way Dev said the words. Without drama, it made them heavier. There's more, Dev continued. She pulled out a photograph, Elena, thin but luminous, holding two swaddled infants. Caleb's hand rested on her shoulder, his face in profile, pride and worry and joy in the single line from his brow to his mouth. The midwife kept a copy. She said Elena insisted on it in case something went wrong and news needed to travel the old-fashioned way. Nora closed her eyes and saw, again, the hospice room where she had met Elena. A small potted plant on the windowsill. Sunlight like a careful visitor. The way Elena had spoken of music, as if it were a long bridge she wanted to cross. She asked me to bring the letter, Nora said softly. She told me it was for her first love and her last friend. Rowan absorbed that without flinching. Caleb knew how to put love into a room. He said, I knew how to put steel into a skyline. He married Elena because he offered her a daily kindness I had mistaken for small. There is nothing small about everyday kindness. Dev cleared her throat gently. The clinic confirms twins. No complications at birth. The mother died last spring. The father died in a road accident 18 months ago. She looked at Rowan, then at Nora. Elena named you guardian. It was not a legal document, no notary, no witnesses, but it was a choice, written in a hand that did not shake. The state placed the children with temporary foster care. Paperwork went missing. A church volunteer did what people do when systems fail. She found a person to hold the babies. Me, Nora said, feeling that old shock of tiny, terrified weight in her arms. They handed me a basket and a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Her laugh was wet around the edges. I've been good with promises since I was 6 and needed to be my own grown-up. But this one, she looked at Leo and Lily, who were now using honey spoons as tiny swords. This one found me. Rowan stood and walked to the piano. Without removing the cover, he set his hand against its outline like someone greeting a long-lost friend through glass. There's a room in this house, he said, voice carrying a hush into the space. I never go into it. The architect called it a folly, a curve of wall that serves no purpose. It was supposed to be a library annex. Caleb thought we should make it a nursery. We fought about it the week before he died. His mouth tilted in grief's rueful smile. He always won our arguments by making me laugh. They followed him down a corridor most guests never saw. He stopped at a blank wall and pressed his palm to a square of white oak. A door they'd walked by a dozen times without seeing, released with a soft click. Inside a crescent of windows, a faded mural of foxes and stars, an antique rocking chair that had belonged to their mother, covered furniture, dust that looked like the ghost of sunlight, and, on a low shelf, a second music box, not the same as the one Nora had brought, but clearly its sibling, tuned to the same stubborn hope. The twins entered the room like explorers finding the hidden city. Lily knelt by the music box, reverential and practical at once. Can I? She asked. Yes, Rowan said, and she turned the key. The song rose, whole this time. The notes, completing the arc, the first box had only suggested. Leo curled up in the rocking chair and watched a dust mote parade in the light, as if it were the most important news of the day. Nora stood in the doorway because if she stepped inside, she might never leave, and she had learned to be careful about rooms that promised more than she could afford to keep. Dev's phone buzzed. She stepped aside, listened, returned. The lab rushed the DNA. She said, "It's preliminary, but she offered the paper to Rowan. He didn't take it. He looked at Nora, and in a small gesture that felt like the first rule of a better world, said, "Will you read it with me?" They read. The paper said what the music already knew. The twins were Caleb's children, by law and blood. Rowan was their uncle. Twist upon twist layered themselves like a cord built from unlikely notes. Elena's letter retrieved from the slush pile of a life too busy to notice kindness. A nursery ready for a joy that had been delayed. A single mom who had been, in the literal sense. A bridge, the human version of a span flung across a gap systems failed to cross. And then Dev, almost as an afterthought, because reporters always find one more question, added, "Your general counsel, Mr. Peck, resigned last month from another firm after a pattern of rerouting communications for high-profile clients came to light. He's under quiet investigation." Nora exhaled, the sound more relief than surprise. So the missing wasn't an accident. She said, "Someone curated it." Rowan didn't answer immediately. He looked at the twins arranged by the music, like moons around a planet. At Nora in the doorway, like someone guarding both her heart and their horizon. He felt anger, that old, familiar engine start to turn. Then he felt something else, newer and more dangerous, in the best way, the urge to choose tenderness over rage. Not because one was weak and the other strong, but because the former made the world more habitable. "Let the lawyers do their part," he said finally. "My part is here." He stepped into the room. Dust rose. Light found him. He sat on the floor as if he'd been taught by a child how to do it. "Leo," he said, "what do you see when you look out that window?" "A whale made of sky," Leo said without hesitation. "And it's talking. What does it say?" Rowan asked, his voice breaking on the simplest of questions. The boy looked at him seriously, and in that solemn gaze, Rowan found both his brother's mischief and Elena's patience. "It says, 'Don't be scared,'" Leo whispered. "It says, 'Come play.' Storms have a way of returning for what they think belongs to them." By late afternoon, the sky darkened again, taking on that greenish bruise that means wind has made up its mind. Mallory consulted 4 weather apps and the old-fashioned ache in her left knee. "We should move to the lower level," she advised. "There's a reinforced space." Rowan defied storms for a living. He knew when to respect them. He shepherded the children and Nora downstairs, through a hallway where the art changed from cool abstraction to family photographs he had moved here long ago, as if tenderness should live below ground where the world could not scuff it. They settled in a room with emergency supplies arranged as beautifully as a tablescape bottled water, lined like soldiers, blankets folded in a museum of neatness, a battery radio that looked like a toy until it spoke with a sober voice. Nora tried to play a game with the twins, name that sound, but the house gave them too many answers. Distant hum of generators, a glissando of rain-down metal, a bass note of thunder. The radio spoke of road closures and wise choices. The wise choice would have been to stay put, but wise choices have never been friends with restless children. Lily slipped away first, drawn by the memory of the nursery and the music box she had adopted as if it had been waiting for her specifically. Leo followed because that was the constellation they understood, one a step ahead, the other a loyal moon. Mallory was in the hallway with a toolbox, tightening the handle of a door that complained. Nora rose to fetch the twins and met Rowan at the same doorway that opened onto a dark corridor, suddenly unfamiliar. "Nursery," she said. "Greenhouse," he said, and his eyes said, "I built a glass garden as a remedy for nights like this. I planted lemon trees against winter." But the glass he had specified for beauty and light, became a liability when the cliff wind turned theatrical. They found Lily first, at the nursery door. Small brows knotted, trying to push it open against a pressure that felt bigger than she was. Music, she announced, offended that the world thought Tim could interrupt lullabies. Later, Rowan said gently, scooping her up, "Play Storm with us instead." He turned and the house lurched. Somewhere along the cliff, land decided it was tired of cooperating. A sound arrived that did not seem like it should fit in a house, the crack and roar of earth moving where it had always pretended to be still. The lights went out, then stumbled back at half strength. An alarm discovered its purpose and declared it repeatedly in a tone designed to accelerate the heart without mercy. "Leo," Nora said. And if the room had collapsed entirely, she would still have said his name like a rope thrown across a widening gap. "Greenhouse," Mallory yelled from down the hall. He was talking about the lemons. Rowan moved without remembering the decision to do so. He had a headlamp on in a second, the kind you keep for adventures and hope you'll never use for emergencies. The back door to the greenhouse had wedged itself. The front was 3 rooms and a walkway away. And already, through the high windows, they could see the wind turning branches into flails. "Nora," he said, "stay with Lily." "Not possible," Nora said, handing Lily to Mallory with a look that deputized her. "I'm coming." They reached the greenhouse corridor as a sheet of rain threw itself against it like a dropped curtain. Inside saw Leo stood on a wooden stool, clever and terrified, reaching up to save a lemon that had torn loose and was rolling toward a drain like a small sun, determined to be swallowed by darkness. "Buddy," Rowan said, voice impossibly calm, "we've got 100 lemons. I need only one of you." Leo blinked at him. Slow recognition of priorities settling into place. He stepped from the stool, and the stool skittered on the wet floor. He fell sideways, not far, but toward a pane already cracked by branches. The glass held, and then, betrayed by a flying shard of grit and the persistence of wind, it sighed and let go. A starburst of fracture raced across the panel with malicious beauty. Time does not slow in crises. It crowds. Nora was already moving, seeing the geometry of hazard before it announced itself. Rowan reached the boy first, covering him with his body, just as the panel surrendered a corner of itself in a shuddering rain of dangerous glitter. Pain found Rowan along the shoulder and down his arm. Sharp, bright, undeniable. And then pain became a secondary concern because a rope of water had chosen this new door and was testing its strength with a fury that remembered gravity. "Back," Mallory shouted, appearing like an answer with a blanket and the kind of presence that makes other presences hold. She shoved a folded mat under the broken edge. "I can hold 2 minutes. Make them count." They did. Nora gathered Leo, whispering the ocean breath story as if it were a spell. Rowan, half blind with a mix of sweat and blood, shoved a planter against the breach. The wind clawed. The planter slid. He shoved another, the greenhouse. His small rebellion against harsh seasons fought him with an intimacy only love can manage. In the end, the 3 of them billionaire, single mom, ex-soldier security chief, made a wall out of their bodies and what they could reach. The alarm stopped screaming. That silence was more terrifying than the noise. It meant power had truly left them. It meant all they had was one another and the practiced rhythm of a world that does not need electricity to keep a heart beating. They made it back to the reinforced room in a mess of adrenaline and reprimands. "Dr. Singh," who had been checking on another patient in a nearby neighborhood and had raced back when the storm turned, arrived at the same moment with a bag that might as well have been a cape. She cleaned Rowan's shoulder with competence and a kind that makes you breathe. 12 stitches, she said, her tone as ordinary as a grocery list and therefore more comforting. You're lucky. Define lucky, Rowan said, through teeth he had decided not to clench. Alive while important to people. Dr. Singh replied, We can never overrate it. Leo cried when he saw the blood, then hiccuped, laughed because Lily said, Uncle Ro is shiny now, pointing at the silver line of a steri strip like a medal. The phrase hung in the air like a bell someone had meant to ring for years. Uncle Ro. It was not a legal title. It was better. Rowan broke then, but not in the way that makes headlines. He broke like ice in spring quietly, with relief at the sound of water moving again. He did not hide his face. He did not leave the room to discipline his feelings into a shape the board would respect. He sat on the floor with the twins and let his eyes be the kind that told stories without words. He found Nora's gaze and said, I'm sorry I wasn't there when your promise began. I want to be there now, not as a benefactor. As he hesitated because he had spent a decade afraid of the word family. Nora supplied. He nodded. Family. Nora should have been suspicious of that word from a man like him, but she had stood with him while a wall of weather tried to convince them they were small, and she had seen what he moved when he decided to move. Family isn't a favor, she said softly. It's an everyday. I want the everyday, he said, and the room understood that this was a vow and not a line. The storm knocked once more on the cliff, as if to check whether anyone had learned anything. The house held. Outside, sirens far away sang their river song. Inside, Rowan reached for the music box, and with his uninjured hand, turned the key. The lullaby threaded through everything: the stitched shoulder, the scattered lemons, the radio's counsel, and drew them all toward a center that sounded a lot like home. The next morning, the world had that rinsed look it gets after a night of bad choices. Sunlight slid across the floor like an apology. The cliff had reshaped itself in minor ways. A new line where soil had decided to reconsider its loyalties. A small sacrificial fig bent as if bowing to the wind's performance. Someone had already swept the hallway. Someone had righted the chair in the greenhouse and inventoried the surviving lemons as if kindness could be done in units. News, because it is the most stubborn weather. Arrived. Dev sent a message. Peck had been asked to step down pending an internal review. 3 quiet settlements had surfaced under his tenure, all involving intercepted communications that redirected decisions in directions that benefited contracts he held quietly through cousins and companies with names like Sturdy Animals. Rowan forwarded the message to a board he had once thought of as his real family. He added 12 words, I will not run my life like a fortress anymore. Help me build bridges. He expected a fight. He got, to his surprise, a sigh of relief from 2 of them who had secretly been looking for a leader and had made do with a legend. The legend had been very good at raising glass. The leader, they suspected, might be better at raising something that did not reflect light so much as make it. The legal matters churned at their slow, necessary speed. Birth certificates were corrected. A court date was set to formalize Rowan as guardian, with Nora as co-guardian at her request and his insistence. They don't need less of you because I have more money, he said in a meeting where language tried to turn people into roles. They need us both because that's the math that has worked so far. Nora moved out of the Blue Lantern. This was not the fairy tale, where the suitcase opens to reveal beautiful new clothes. It was the one where the suitcase opens onto a drawer full of small socks that will be matched by someone who understands the holiness of such chores. She brought her own coffee mug to the mansion and put it on a shelf not near the expensive cups. And no one moved it. She took the twins to a park later that week in a neighborhood where the houses wore paint like hope. She watched them make friends with two kids whose mom traded recipes with her on a bench. She learned the names of the groundskeepers, who had been polite but distant. Now they waved like uncles. Rowan sat at the piano one evening after dinner while the twins washed their hands with a seriousness that suggested they had been chosen for a public office. He removed the cover as if undressing shame. He placed his fingers on the keys, and out came not the lullaby, but a new thing that had been building under his skin since the knock on the door. It sounded like glass learning to be water. It sounded like the low hum of a hospital at 3 a.m. when someone decides to stand and keep standing. It sounded like pancakes and paperwork and the way Leo said, please, as if it were an invitation to be your best self. Name it, Lily demanded. As children demand, so they can catalog the world and make it less likely to surprise them in cruel ways. Every day, Rowan said, glancing at Nora because she had given him the word. It's a song for washing hands in waiting rooms and lemon trees that survive and people who stay. They made a routine, which is a fancy word for a liturgy of ordinary acts. Lemon pancakes on Sundays. Nora's night shift traded for mornings because mornings became a festival of socks and songs and the news read aloud in different voices. A walk to the cliff with a small hand in each of theirs. Mallory teaching the twins how to coil a garden hose, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. Lily chanted, suspicious that a rhyme could be true, Dr. Singh bringing a stethoscope so everyone could hear everyone else's heartbeat at the kitchen table because science, like love, often requires proof that is also poetry. Rowan opened a community center in an old warehouse near the docks. The building had the bones of something that had hauled fish and dreams a century ago. He put windows in that let the river in without the smell. He named it The Summer Finds Us, from Elena's scrawled blessing on the back of a photograph. It had music rooms and parenting classes, and a closet where people could borrow suits for job interviews, and a lawyer on Tuesdays who answered questions about custody without making anyone feel smaller for asking. The first time he played every day in the biggest room, the piano sounded proud to be useful. The board grumbled, as boards do when budgets reallocate toward things that can't be measured in the traditional quarterly ways. Then a contractor, whose son had taught him a new kind of patience, made a donation that broke a stalemate. Then a woman who had grown up, certain that rich people lived behind glass and never reached out, watched a billionaire sit cross-legged on a gym floor and learn a clapping game, wrong 3 times in a row, and something in her that had been hard on itself for years softened, and she signed a check. On the day the court declared Rowan and Nora guardians together. The twins wore mismatched socks because joy almost always rushes faster than coordination. The judge, who had seen more sadness than paperwork, should be allowed to absorb, manage the rare feat of smiling with her whole face. Families, she said after the formalities were pronounced, are built from verbs. That night, back at the Cliff House, they ate lemon cake because some narratives deserve their own fruit. Mallory, the world's most serious celebrant, produced sparklers from a cabinet no one knew she used to store contraband joy. Dr. Singh lifted a glass of something that caught the last light and said, to the song we didn't know we needed. Rowan watched Nora move among it all, handing out napkins, rescuing a slice of cake from the edge of a plate. listening with her eyes when Leo felt the need to explain why all whales should be named something that sounds like wind. He felt the particular gratitude that has shame braided through it, not because he had done something wrong, but because life had waited, terribly and beautifully and without explanation, for him to arrive. On the balcony, after the twins fell asleep in one pile like puppies, he said, "I keep thinking about how I didn't expect this." Nora laughed. "Quiet. Me neither. I thought I knew my story." He said, "Man builds towers because the ground is untrustworthy. Man keeps people at a distance because closeness is a risk the market will not reward. Then a single mom knocks, and the market has nothing to say about the sound a music box makes in a hallway." "You never expected to be an uncle," she said. "I never expected family to be the thing that made my work feel like a bridge instead of a monument," he answered. He took her hand with a lack of theater that made it more honest. "I don't know what we'll call each other beyond guardians and friends and whatever the children decide is convenient. I know I want you here beyond courts and papers." Nora looked at their joined hands, then at the ocean, then at the sky, trying on stars. "Okay," she said, the most revolutionary syllable, taught in kitchens and hospital corridors, and now a cliff house where money and mercy had decided to learn each other. "Okay." Inside, the music box had been left open, its spring wound down, and, in the last few turns, the song made that lovely tired sound things make when they have done a good job. Rowan's new melody lingered in the strings of the piano. The twins dreamed of whales that teach bravery and lemons that glow. The house, once a place that had perfected the art of containing, learned the gentler art of welcoming. A single mom had knocked on a mansion and taught a billionaire that the rarest wealth is the kind that asks, daily, "How can I be good to what I love?" The answer, it turned out, sounded like rain on glass, like a child's humming, like two adults choosing the everyday. And if the world needed a final image, it could have this four people on a balcony, not posing, just leaning into an evening that felt, for once, like it would hold